The signal had been going out for 200 years. Every single day, without fail, the Veilthari High Choir gathered in the great stone hall at the top of Serral Prime's highest peak and sang it into the sky. 47 languages, 10,000 variations, each one mathematically perfect, each one carrying the same core message, shaped into something so clean and so beautiful that any civilization with ears should have wept upon hearing it. "We are dying. We are good people. Please help." The stars did not answer. That was not entirely true, of course. The chorus of aligned worlds answered. They always answered. Within 3 cycles of every broadcast, a formal response would arrive on official channels. Warm, carefully worded, full of phrases like deepest solidarity and ongoing deliberation and resolution pending final review. The chorus had been deliberating for 60 years. The resolution was on its 44th draft. There was a committee. There were subcommittees. There was a subcommittee formed specifically to review the findings of the original subcommittee, and it met twice a year, on a station orbiting a star so far from Veilthari space that its light hadn't reached them yet. Elder Serat Yal had read every response. She kept them in a carved wooden box beside her bed. She did not know why she kept them. Kindling, maybe. She stood at the window of the choir hall now, and watched her granddaughter practice. The girl, 14 years old, voice like water over smooth stone, stood with her back straight and her hands folded, and sang the 3rd prayer variation in the old tongue. Perfect posture, perfect pitch. 200 years of tradition moving through her small body like something sacred. Serath Yal watched and felt a thing she did not say out loud. She felt tired. Not the tired of old age, though she had that too. This was the tired of a people who had done everything right and were still losing. The Veilthari had no wars in their recorded history. None. They had resolved every conflict through song and dialogue and the slow, patient work of understanding. They had fed their poor. They had healed their sick. They had built their civilization on the understanding that goodness was a kind of armor. That if you were worthy enough, the universe would recognize it. The universe, it turned out, did not care. The Dravek had cared. The Dravek had noticed them 60 years ago and had liked what they saw. Not their music, not their philosophy, their planet mostly. The mineral composition of Serral Prime's crust was worth more to a Dravek mining operation than anything the Veilthari had ever created. The Dravek did not negotiate. They did not have subcommittees. They had a word in their language that translated roughly as prior occupants, and it was not a polite word. For 60 years, the Dravek had been squeezing. Trade routes shut down. Veilthari colony ships turned back. Veilthari diplomatic vessels that left the system sometimes did not return, and the Dravek would express regret about this in formal channels, while their fleet grew larger in the dark at the edge of Veilthari space. The chorus of aligned worlds noted these developments with great concern. In the great market city of Varat Sol, people were selling their second homes to buy food. The spaceport at Serral Prime's equator was crowded with families trying to get their children out before whatever was coming arrived. The priests were praying harder. The choirs were singing louder. The signal was going up every day in 47 languages, and it was beautiful, and it meant nothing. Serath Yal's granddaughter finished her practice and looked up. "Did I do it right, grandmother?" "Yes," Serath Yal said. "Perfect." The girl smiled. She had her mother's smile. Her mother was on one of the colony ships, one of the ones that had not come back. Serath Yal did not tell her granddaughter this, because the girl was 14 and still believed the prayers would work, and Serath Yal was not ready to take that from her yet. She would need to take it from her soon. That was the thing about reality. It arrived whether you were ready or not. The signal went up that evening. The 10,000th broadcast. Serath Yal stood on the roof of the choir hall and watched it go. Watched the transmission beam cut up through the atmosphere and scatter into the dark. Somewhere out there, civilizations were receiving it, processing it, filing it. She went to bed. 3 days later, the Dravek fleet entered the system. They did not hail. They did not send a formal notification or a declaration. or even the cold diplomatic warning that protocol required. They simply came, the way a tide comes, the way a fire comes, and within 6 hours, the orbital defense platforms were gone. And within 12 hours, the great coastal city of Verat Sol was burning. And within a day there was nothing left above Seral Prime but Dravek ships and the debris of things the Veilthari had built. In the chaos, 7 ships got out. Only one got far. The Undying Hymn was a transport vessel, not built for speed, not built for war, built for moving people between colony stations with comfort and dignity. It was now carrying 300 survivors in a hull designed for 80. Children in the cargo hold. Elders sitting in the maintenance corridors. Davin, the ship's young navigation assistant, had never plotted an emergency jump in his life, and did it in 11 minutes, with his hands shaking so hard he could barely read the console. They jumped, came out somewhere dark and empty, and unregistered on any Veilthari chart. Sareth Yal sat in the middle of the ship's gathering space, surrounded by crying children and silent adults, and the smell of too many bodies in too little air. And she held the wooden box of chorus responses in her lap, and stared at the wall. She did not pray. She had been praying for 70 years. Every morning, every evening, twice on the holy days. She had prayed with perfect form and genuine heart, and absolute faith that goodness moved through the universe like a current, and eventually, if you were good enough, and patient enough, and precise enough in your asking, it would carry something back to you. It had not carried anything back. Around her, others began to pray, spontaneously, quietly, voices rising in the old words, the choir harmonies built into them from childhood, like breathing. The sound was extraordinary. Even here, even now, 300 people on a broken ship in empty space, singing. Sareth Yal held her box and said nothing. Somewhere very far away, impossibly far, in a direction none of them had ever pointed their prayers, a small automated relay station picked up their signal. Not the beautiful prayer, the ugly one, the emergency beacon Davin had activated when they jumped, the one that broadcast on every frequency, including several they didn't even know existed, the one that said nothing holy, or musical, or philosophical, just coordinates, just noise, just here, 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 and in that direction something heard it. Something that had never once in its history waited for a committee to tell it what to do about screaming. H2. What the refugee ship picked up. H2. By the 4th day, the water was being rationed. Not the food. The food had already been rationed on day 2. The water was rationed on day 4, because Navigator Pelosoon, a careful, quiet woman who had spent 30 years calculating supply routes, did the math in her head while the others slept, and then sat with the number for a long time before she told anyone. She told Sareth Yal first. That was habit. In the old world, you told the elders first. The elders decided what the people were allowed to know and when. Sareth Yal looked at her. Tell everyone. It will cause panic. They are already panicking quietly, Sareth Yal said. Loud panic is at least honest. Pelosoon told them. There was no panic, actually. There was something worse. A long, heavy silence that settled over 300 people like a physical weight. And then very small sounds. A child asking a question. A parent answering in a low voice. The sound of people deciding what to do with a feeling that had no good place to go. Davin, who was 23 years old, and had never expected to be the most qualified pilot on any vessel, was running the communication arrays from the navigation console. He sent the prayer signal every 6 hours, the standard Veilthari distress broadcast, all 47 languages, the full formal version with the mathematical encoding that the chorus of aligned worlds required for official processing. The chorus responded on the 3rd day. The message was warm. It noted their displacement with profound sorrow. It confirmed that the situation on Seral Prime had been formally raised at the emergency session. A special envoy was being considered. The process was underway. Davin read it twice, and then minimized the window. On the 5th day he picked up a ship. It came in from the outer edge of the system, whatever unnamed system they had jumped into, moving at a speed that was technically legal under Chorus navigation treaties, but only just. It was not broadcasting a diplomatic transponder. It had no formal registry signal. Davin ran its hull configuration through every database they had, and got one partial match. A configuration class used by independent contractors, bounty haulers, and several categories of entity the Vaeltari politely declined to do business with. He told Sarathiel. She came to the console and looked at the readings with the expression of a woman who had stopped being surprised by bad news several days ago. "Hail them," she said. He hailed them in the 7 most common languages of the outer systems. No response. He tried the Chorus standard greeting. Nothing. He tried the Vaeltari peace salutation. 30 words. Very old. Designed to communicate non-aggression to any species that processed language structurally. The ship did not respond to any of it. Then it hailed them. In Dravek. The voice was flat and businesslike, the way all Dravek voices were flat and businesslike, as if everything they said was an invoice. It said, "Undying Hymn Registry Vessel. You are catalogued under Hegemony Acquisition Order 774. We are authorized to collect. Please reduce speed and prepare for boarding. Payment for the finder's fee will be processed within standard cycle." In the cargo hold, a child started crying. Then several children. Then adults. Pella soon looked at Davin. Davin looked at the console. The numbers did not improve under pressure. The bounty ship was faster. Their engine was already at full output. There was nowhere to jump to. They didn't have the fuel, and Davin didn't know this space well enough to punch blind again. The last time he'd done it, they'd gotten lucky. He knew enough about probability to know that luck was not a navigational strategy. He was composing a response, formal, diplomatic, requesting clarification on legal grounds, when the transmission cut out. Like something had reached into the signal and closed a fist around it. For 3 seconds there was complete silence on every channel. Then, a new contact appeared on the proximity sensor. Davin stared at it. He adjusted the sensor calibration, because the reading made no sense. The new ship had come from nowhere. Not from fold space in any way he recognized. Not at a trajectory that matched any registered approach vector. It was simply not there, and then it was there, and it was between them and the bounty hunter, and it was moving at a speed that made him feel briefly sick to look at the number. "What is it?" Pello soon asked. "I don't know," Davin said. He ran the hull configuration, no match. He ran the registry signal, no signal. He ran the communication band it was broadcasting on. Nothing came back. Not silence. He knew what silence looked like on the board. This was something else. Like the ship was talking on a frequency his equipment could see the shape of, but not translate. The bounty hunter fired first. Davin saw the weapons discharge on the sensor board. 2 shots. Good shots. Aimed well. He watched the readings that told him they'd hit. He watched the unknown ship not slow down. He watched what happened next and did not fully understand it, because it happened very fast and involved weapons technology he had never seen, and in 14 seconds, the bounty hunter was not a ship anymore. It was a collection of pieces, drifting, some of them still warm. Silence. The unknown ship sat in the debris and did nothing for a moment. Then, it began to move again. Back the way it had come. Not toward them, not at them, just away. Like something that had dealt with a problem and was moving on to whatever came next. It stopped. Like something had changed its mind, and it was facing them now. And it sat there. And Davin's sensor board was giving him readings he didn't have reference points for. And he realized that whatever was on that ship was looking at them the way you look at something you weren't expecting, but are now choosing to pay attention to. Sarathiel stood very still behind him. "It is not Chorus," Pelofsun said. It was not a question. "No," Sarathiel said. "It is not anyone we know." "No." The 3 of them stood looking at the sensor board, and the sensor board looked back at them, for the shape of a ship that had no name they knew, from a world they had never pointed a prayer toward, that had just killed something without being asked and without hesitation, and was now deciding what to do about them. Davin's hands were very still above the console. "Should I hail it?" he asked. Sarath looked at the readings for a long time. The debris from the bounty hunter was still spreading slowly across the sector, pieces tumbling in silence. She thought about the wooden box, about 47 languages and 10,000 broadcasts, and 60 years of waiting for goodness to recognize goodness. Yes, she said, try everything. He tried everything. The ship waited. Then, on a frequency so basic and so old, it was barely above noise, the kind of frequency used in the earliest days of space communication before anyone had developed anything elegant, a voice came through. It did not greet them in any formal language. It said, "Your beacon's been going for 5 days. What's chasing you, and how many?" Davin opened his mouth, closed it. Sarath leaned forward and pressed the transmit key herself. "The Dravek hegemony," she said. "The main fleet. We do not know the exact number. It was very large." A pause. Short. Not the pause of someone thinking. The pause of someone making a decision they had probably already made. "Okay. Sit still." That was all. The unknown ship began to move with purpose, and Sarath straightened up and stood with her hands at her sides, and felt something move through her that she did not have a word for in any of the 47 languages. Not hope. Something older and stranger than hope. First contact is not what the song said. They had imagined this moment, in the way that all long-suffering people imagine rescue. Not in any formal way. No Valthari theological text described first contact with a savior race in specific terms. But the shape of it lived in their stories, in their music, in the way the old prayer songs described the arrival of grace. Something vast and luminous, coming slowly, coming gently, making itself known first through beauty and then through presence. The prayers always described the saved recognizing the Savior by the quality of light they carried. The ISV Bastard's Dividend docked with a sound like a garbage disposal fighting a pipe wrench. It clamped onto the Undying Hymn's secondary airlock with the kind of confidence that suggested its pilot had never once asked permission for anything. And the docking seal pressurized in about 40 seconds, a process that was supposed to take 4 minutes under standard protocol. Then the inner door opened, and the humans walked in, and Sarath understood, looking at them, that every story her people had ever told about rescue was going to need to be completely rewritten. There were 4 of them. The one in front, a woman, short and broad-shouldered, with close-cut hair, and the posture of someone who had learned to take up exactly as much space as she needed, and not 1 unit more, was eating. She had a packet of something in her left hand, and she was working through it with the focused, unapologetic efficiency of a person who had decided that eating was a task to be completed, and would not be derailed by irrelevant ceremony. Her right hand rested near a weapon on her hip. Not on it. Near it. Behind her, a man so large that he had to turn sideways through the airlock door, wearing armor that had visible damage on the left shoulder plate, and what appeared to be a fresh repair job done with something that was not the correct material. He was looking around the ship, the way you look around a place when you are assessing how many people need to be moved and how fast. The third was younger, holding a device and already scanning. Atmospheric content, Davin realized, watching the readings. She was testing their air, not asking, testing. The fourth stood at the door, and watched the corridor, and did not look at the Valthari at all. Just the corridor, just the angles. His eyes moved in a pattern Davin recognized after a moment, as the pattern of someone checking every direction that something could come from. Sarath had prepared words. She had prepared them in the human's own crude frequency language, a translation matrix built from the signal analysis during their brief communication, a formal greeting acknowledging the aid given, requesting the honor of a name, offering the traditional Valthari welcome phrase that had opened 10,000 diplomatic encounters in 2 centuries. She drew breath. The woman in front looked directly at her and said, "How many days since you ate? All of you, I mean, not just adults." The prepared words dissolved. 4 days for the children, Sarath said. 2 for the adults. We have been rationing. Kev, the woman said, and the young one with the scanner was already moving back toward the airlock, without being told anything else, presumably to get food, and the woman turned her attention back to Sarathial with the complete focus of someone who had filed the food problem under being handled and moved on. "I'm Osei," she said. It seemed to be a complete introduction. "Where were you when they hit you?" "Seral Prime, our home system. The Dravek. Direction from here." Sarathial turned and pointed toward a section of the hull. Osei looked at Pelosun, who was already at the navigation console, and Pelosun gave the coordinates without being asked. Osei looked at her own wrist. Some kind of device there, and appeared to do something with the information. "Fleet size," Osei said. "We don't know exactly," Davan said. We left before we could count." Osei did not seem frustrated by this. "How many got you to run?" 40, perhaps more." Osei looked at the large man. Something passed between them. Not quite a look, more like a very small adjustment in the way they were both standing. Then Osei went back to her food packet. This was the thing that was difficult to process. She kept eating. Throughout all of it. She ate while asking questions, and she ate while the large man, who turned out to be Corporal Tibor, as she introduced him a few minutes later, with the brevity of someone reading off a list, went through the ship, doing something that involved touching walls and looking at junctions, and crouching down to inspect things beneath floor panels. She ate while the young one, Kev, came back through the airlock with sealed crates that turned out to contain more food than the Undying Hymn had carried in its original supply load. The children came out of the cargo hold when they smelled it. Tibor was the one who noticed them first. He stopped what he was doing, mid-crouch inspecting a coolant coupling, and looked at them. There were 11 children ranging from perhaps 5 to 14 years old, all of them hollow-eyed and quiet in the way children go quiet when they have seen too much. They stood in a cluster in the doorway, and looked at the enormous man in the damaged armor. Tibor looked back at them. He reached into a pocket on his leg, a different pocket from any of the weapon-related ones, and produced something small and yellow, and held it out flat on his palm. One of the youngest children came forward, took it, bit it, made a face that was almost a smile. Tibor made the same face back, only bigger. He crossed his eyes. He uncrossed his eyes, and crossed them again in the other direction, which was not anatomically possible, and yet somehow he was doing it. The child laughed. The sound was so unexpected in the silence of the ship that several adults turned to look. Tibor did not speak to the children. He did not know their language, and he did not try to find words. He just made faces, and let them touch his armor, and showed the older ones how the chest plate opened and closed with a push, and within 20 minutes he had 6 children climbing on him, while he continued, with great patience, to inspect the ship's coolant system. Sarathial watched this for a long time. Osei came to stand beside her. She had finished the food packet, and had not replaced it with another one, so her hands were free, and she had apparently decided that Sarathial was the person to talk to. "Your ship needs work," Osei said. "Yes. We can fix the main drive seal. You'll lose the secondary coolant loop in about 6 days otherwise." "Thank you." Osei nodded. Brief, functional. Sarathial looked at her. She wanted to ask a question. The question felt large and slightly dangerous. The kind of question where the answer might change something that could not be changed back. "Why are you here?" she asked. "You have no treaty with us. You have no obligation. The Chorus of Aligned Worlds has deliberated on our situation for 60 years and has not acted. You received a signal this morning and you were here by afternoon. I want to understand what principle moves you." Osei was quiet for a moment. "You were screaming," she said. Sarathial waited. There had to be more. There had to be a doctrine, a theology, a formal position on the moral obligations of developed civilizations toward the suffering, a legal framework, a historical precedent, something. Osei looked at her steadily and said nothing else. That was the whole principle. No scripture behind it. No committee. No framework. A sound was made in the dark and something heard it and came. That was the complete and total sum of the philosophy. Sereth Yal turned away. She walked to the far end of the gathering space, and sat down with her wooden box on her lap, and looked at the wall, while behind her, the humans moved through her broken ship with the quiet competence of people for whom this was Tuesday. She had prayed for 70 years. She had used beautiful words. She had been so precise, so worthy, so patient. And the universe had sent her 4 people, one of whom had been eating the entire time, and a corporal who crossed his eyes for children, and a ship called the Bastard's Dividend. She opened the wooden box, looked at the stack of chorus responses inside, warm, careful, full of sorrow and ongoing process and pending resolution. She closed it again. She did not know whether to weep. She did not know whether to laugh. She did both, quietly, and nobody saw. When she stood up again, her face was still. The thing humans do when you hurt something they've decided is theirs. The Dravek fleet came out of fold space in the early hours of the second day. 43 ships, maybe 45. The Undying Hymn sensors weren't precise at that range, and Davin had learned not to trust the outer edge readings since the coolant issue. Regardless of the exact number, it was the kind of fleet that ended arguments. It was the kind of fleet that made philosophical positions irrelevant. Standing in front of it with anything less than a full chorus military deployment was not a strategy. It was a statement, and the statement was very short, and not in any of the 47 languages. Davin looked at the readings, and then looked at Osei. Osei was looking at the readings too. Her expression was not the expression of someone facing annihilation. It was the expression of someone doing arithmetic. "Get me comms to my command," she said to Kev. Kev had it open in seconds. The channel connected in what seemed like no time at all, which meant, Pelosun noted quietly to Sereth Yal, that wherever their command was, it was not particularly far away. They had not come from the other side of the galaxy. They were present in this region in a way that was not accidental. Osei's end of the conversation was brief. She gave coordinates, fleet count, the rough configuration of the Dravek ships. She listened. She said yes twice, and then closed the channel. 3 more dividends are routing to this sector, she told her crew. Tibor made a small sound in his chest that might have been satisfaction. The 4th human, the quiet one whose name turned out to be Specialist Rowe, and who had barely spoken more than 6 words since boarding, checked something on his wrist and went back to watching the corridor. Pelosun looked at Sereth Yal. 4 ships against 43 was not better math. It was slightly worse math, with more variables. The vile Thari had run the numbers on scenarios like this during the early years of the Dravek pressure campaign, back when they still believed a military solution was something they could plan for. The numbers had not been encouraging then. They were not encouraging now. "We should move the children deeper into the ship," Sereth Yal said. "Already done," Tibor said from somewhere behind her, which meant he had anticipated this before she said it, and she did not know whether that was reassuring or frightening. The Dravek fleet came closer. At a certain range, a hail opened automatically. The Dravek did this, set the formal demand before weapons fire as a matter of recorded protocol, so that the record would show they had offered terms and the terms had not been taken. It was a legal courtesy. Everyone understood that the terms were not real terms. The terms were, stop existing here, stop existing in general, allow us to process your planet. The hail came through on the main channel, and Osei put it on speaker without asking. The Dravek commander's voice filled the Undying Hymn, flat, businesslike, absolutely certain of the outcome, and listed the fleet composition and the weapons capacity, and the legal framework under which the vile Thari were classified as hegemony property, pending formal annexation of their system. Then it addressed the Bastard's Dividend directly. It gave the ship's registry, they had identified it then, and it noted the destruction of the bounty hunter, which it described as an act of aggression against hegemony assets, and it said, in the same flat tone, that the humans aboard the vessel were welcome to leave the area, and would not be pursued if they did so within the next 30 cycles. It was almost generous. The Dravek commander seemed almost amused to be offering it. Osei leaned forward and keyed the transmit. "You have 10 minutes," she said. "Start moving the other direction." A pause. The Dravek commander said with the patience of someone explaining gravity to a rock, The fleet composition, the weapons range, the ratio of ships, the absolute certainty of the outcome. It laid these things out with the thoroughness of someone who wanted the record to show that the humans had been given every opportunity to understand the situation. "I know," Osei said. "I'm giving you 10 minutes anyway." She closed the channel. Sareth Yal stood very still. Around her, the Vaelthari had the look of people standing at the edge of something, with no railing. This was not the fear of a people who had never known fear. They had lived under Dravek pressure for 60 years. They knew fear very well. This was different. This was the particular disorientation of not being able to read the situation. She had no framework for Osei. She had no category. She looked at Davin. He was looking at Corporal Tibor. "What are your people thinking right now?" Davin asked him. "Truly." Tibor considered this as if it were a reasonable question, which he seemed to find it. He scratched the back of his neck. "Honestly?" He thought a moment more. "Probably hoping the Dravek don't run." Davin stared at him. "That is not sane," Davin said. Tibor nodded, pleasantly, like a man agreeing about the weather. "Yeah." The 10 minutes passed. The Dravek fleet did not move. What happened next was not a battle in any sense the Vaelthari had a word for. They had words for battles, old words, theoretical words from histories they had studied, precisely because they were not the sort of history they intended to repeat. A battle, in those words, was an exchange. Position and counterposition, force and resistance, and the slow arithmetic of attrition. What happened in the next 30 minutes was not an exchange. It was a lesson, and the lesson was delivered at the kind of speed that bypassed any possibility of an intelligent response. The 4 human ships moved in a pattern that Pello soon could not name or map in real time. "It looked chaotic from the outside," she said later, "until you realized that it had a logic that simply operated faster than anything she had seen." They did not fight the Dravek fleet's strengths. They found the places between the strengths, and they moved through them, and they were absolutely without hesitation. And the hesitation was what killed you. Pello soon would understand later, when she had had time to replay the sensor logs. The Dravek were not used to things that did not hesitate. 6 ships went first, then 4 more, in the span of a breath. The fleet's formation broke, not collapsed, broke, splintered, individual commanders making individual decisions, and the moment it broke, it stopped being a fleet in any functional sense, and became 43 separate problems that each thought they were doing something smart, while the humans moved through them like they had already calculated every option and found all of them acceptable. 14 minutes, the whole thing. Then the Dravek ran. Not an orderly withdrawal, ran. Ships crossing each other's vectors, full drives engaging before they were at safe distance. One vessel clipping another in the rush, and both of them spinning away damaged into the dark. The composed, businesslike certainty of the Dravek commander's voice was so far gone it might have been from a different species. The bastard's dividend came back to them. Did not pursue. Just came back. Sareth Yal stood at the viewport and watched the Dravek fleet scatter and disappear, piece by piece, into the dark between stars. And she felt something move through her that had no name in any prayer she had ever sung. It was not joy. Joy was clean. Joy was bright. This was something else. Something that lived lower in the body and cared less about being appropriate. She had been good for so long. She had been patient and worthy and precise in her goodness. And she had watched everything she loved burn regardless. And now, she was standing here watching the people who had burned it, running from 4 ships, crewed by beings who said yeah to being called insane. And the feeling in her chest was ugly, and it was enormous, and she was not going to call it by any of the names the prayer songs used for holy things. But it was real. Behind her, a child asked if it was over. Tibor said yes, it was over, and crouched down, and showed the child how to make the armor light blink, by pressing a certain panel. And the child pressed it, over and over, watching the small light pulse blue in the dark of the ship. Sareth Yal turned away from the viewport. She did not pray. She just breathed. That in itself felt like enough. What we send when we finally answer. The chorus of aligned worlds convened its emergency session 42 days after the Dravik fleet retreated. The hall where they met was on a station that orbited a dim and peaceful star, and the hall itself was beautiful. Built over 800 years from the shared materials of 200 civilizations, each species contributing something from their homeworld, so that the combined result was a kind of monument to the idea that very different things could sit together in the same room. The lighting was calibrated to be comfortable for 17 different types of eyes. The acoustics were perfect. The chairs were wrong for nearly everyone, but the floor was very clean. 240 representatives sat in it now, and they were unhappy in the particular way that comfortable people get unhappy when the world moves without their permission. Sareth Yal had been asked to testify. She stood at the center of the floor, the old ceremonial position, the place where petitioners stood in chorus deliberations, and looked at 240 faces that had been deliberating her people's survival for 60 years, while her people died. She was dressed in the formal Veilthari robes. She had done her hair the way her grandmother had taught her. She realized, prepared for this the same way she had prepared for everything her whole life, with dignity and precision and care. The chorus speaker was a tall, gray-skinned being from a species called the Orenti, which had been founding members of the chorus for 400 years, and had the manner of people who had been important for a very long time and had found it comfortable. He asked about the humans. Formally, the session was titled, Review of Extra-Jurisdictional Military Intervention by Unregistered Civilization. The document was 40 pages long. Sareth Yal had read it. It listed the 14 diplomatic protocols the humans had violated. It noted the destruction of Dravik assets and the potential for retaliatory escalation. It expressed serious concern about the precedent being set by unilateral action without chorus authorization. It did not mention, anywhere in 40 pages, that the undying hymn had been carrying 300 survivors and 11 children and a wooden box full of unanswered letters. Tell us, the chorus speaker said, the nature of the human intervention. Were you in communication with them before they arrived? Did they indicate their intentions? Did they have, in your assessment, a political or territorial motivation? Sareth Yal looked at him. They had food, she said. They brought it immediately, before any negotiation, before any treaty discussion, before any formal establishment of relations. They fed our children. A pause. The chorus speaker nodded slowly, his expression patient and attentive, the expression of a man waiting for relevant information to begin. Their commander's name is Staff Sergeant Yara Ose, Sareth Yal said. When she boarded our vessel, she asked how long since we had eaten. Not who we were, not what we could offer in exchange for assistance. How long since we had eaten. More nodding. The room was quiet. I asked her why she came, Sareth Yal said. I asked what principle moved her. I did not know what I expected. A treaty doctrine. A statement of shared values. Something I could record and place in our formal history. She paused. The room waited. She said, You were screaming. The words sat in the perfect acoustics of the chorus hall, in the calibrated light, among the 240 representatives of 800 years of deliberated civilization. Nobody said anything. She did not say, Our doctrine of interspecies responsibility compelled us, Sareth Yal continued. She did not say, We have been monitoring your situation and concluded that intervention was proportionate. She said, You were screaming. That was the complete answer. That was the whole principle. Something was screaming, and they could hear it, and they came. Elder Sareth Yal, the chorus's concern is not with the motivation of, Your concern, Sareth Yal said, is that they did not ask your permission. Silence. We broadcast our distress signal for 200 years, she said. Her voice was even. She had decided on the ship to this station that she would not be angry here. Anger was for living. This was for the record. 10,000 broadcasts, 47 languages, mathematical encoding. We used every format your protocols required. You received every signal. You responded to every signal. You expressed sorrow. You formed committees. You drafted resolutions. The most recent draft was number 44. She looked at the room. Our world burned while you were on draft 44. No one spoke. The humans arrived in an afternoon, she said. They violated 14 protocols. They did not file a pre-action notice. They do not have a registered civilization status with the chorus. They ate while they worked, and their largest soldier made faces to stop our children from crying. She paused. The Dravek have not moved against a protected species in 6 weeks. That is, I am told, unprecedented. The chorus speaker said, Elder, the question before this body is whether humanity represents a destabilizing force in the organized structure of— Yes, Sarathial said. He stopped. Yes, she said again. They are a destabilizing force. They do not wait for permission. They do not file notices. They hear screaming, and they come, and they are not gentle about what they do when they arrive, and they do not appear to have a mechanism for hesitation. She looked at the speaker. So is fire. She let that sit. Fire does not ask before it warms you, she said. It does not file a request before it burns what is hurting you. It is dangerous, and it is real, and it is present, which is more than I can say for any resolution this body has ever drafted on behalf of my people. She stepped back from the floor. The session continued for 4 more hours. She did not speak again. She sat in the observer section and listened to 240 representatives discuss the legal and diplomatic implications of humanity. And she noticed that none of them were discussing whether the 300 Vilethari survivors were alive, and whether the children had eaten, and whether the secondary coolant loop had been fixed before the 6-day deadline. She knew those answers. She knew because Osei's crew had fixed the coolant loop personally on the morning of the 3rd day, and because there was a new resettlement site being prepared on a world called Karath Vel, by a species that had heard about the undying hymn and offered land, and because Tibor had exchanged communication codes with the eldest Vilethari child, and apparently continued to send her things that blinked. She knew because humans wrote after they left, not formal communiques, messages, direct, brief, irregular in timing, exactly like the people who sent them. She left the chorus hall when the session broke and walked to the transit port and booked a vessel back to Karath Vel. On the transport, she sat by the observation window and watched the stars, and thought about screaming and silence, and the particular quality of the thing that had finally answered. Somewhere far from the chorus hall, on a ship with a name that made the Vilethari translators pause and look at each other, Staff Sergeant Yara Osei was 2 hours into a new patrol route. Kev had picked up a signal. 30 years old, coming from a system 4 light hours to port. A species called the Vethkari, broadcasting on the same basic frequencies as the old Vilethari emergency beacon. 30 years. The same message, 30 years running. We are dying. Please help. Osei looked at the signal. She looked at what the chart said was in that direction, and she ran a quick mental calculation about fuel and time and fleet availability, and the 14 diplomatic protocols she would definitely be violating. Ro looked at her from the navigation seat. Authorization, he said. It was almost a joke. Almost. Osei was already adjusting the course. No god was going to answer the Vethkari's prayers. Nobody on a station orbiting a dim and peaceful star was going to get to draft 44 before something was done. She was already moving.